Hi, I wanted to walk you through the process of downgrading a new APIC M4 or L4 server from the code that is shipped from the factory, which is probably 6.0 something, to version 5.3. If you're trying to swap out an end-of-life Generation 2 or 3 APIC, you'll need to first downgrade the new server to a version that's compatible with the existing cluster. The earliest version that the M4 or L4 are supported is 5.3. This may also mean you will need to upgrade your existing fabric to 5.3 before proceeding to swap out the APICs. This process should also work for upgrading to a newer version, or even just re-imaging the server if needed. So let's get started. This guide is helpful to walk you through the steps. Today, we're going to be using the virtual media option of re-imaging the APIC server. Specifically, we're going to use the SIMC to mount a virtual DVD from an ISO file, then use a web server to download the full image during the install. This is required for the M4 and L4 APICs, as the ISO images have gotten so big that it doesn't work well over just the vMedia option that you may be more familiar with. The first step is to log into your APIC's SIMC using a web browser. The IP address is the IP that you defined when configuring the SIMC settings out of the box using a physical keyboard and monitor. The password is what you defined in that same initial setup step. Now that you're logged in, you will want to check the SIMC version the server is running. This is not the ACI software version, but rather the firmware on the physical server. You will also likely need to upgrade this to the recommended version, but that will be in a different video. This is a great site to get the current generally recommended versions. Scroll down past the latest releases and find the recommended releases. If you look at the 5.3 branch, version 5.3 2B is recommended, and for the M4 and L4 servers, this is the current SIMC version suggested. You can see this server is running the current recommended version. To give you a sense of how long this process will take, I'll start a timer here in the corner. First, click on the Launch KVM link from the SIMC webpage. It will bring up a new window that is a virtual monitor. As you can see, this server has been powered on and booted up to the initial setup screen. If you click any key, you can see what the current version of ACI APIC software this is running. Note, not all versions may display the code version here. If you wanted to start the configuration process for this APIC, you could hit enter here and begin filling out the required information. However, this is not what we want to do today, but rather re-image this server to version 5.2 3B. What we will do is SSH to the server's SIMC IP address. You will log in with the user admin and the same password you used to log in to the SIMC web interface. Next, we're going to map a virtual ISO image over HTTP. I have already downloaded the APIC ISO for version 5.2.3b and placed it on a web server. This command will let you map a virtual media file via CIFS, NFS, or web. This next word is just a name for the particular mapping. It can be whatever you want it to be. I'll call it APIC. Then you type in the URL of your web server where the ISO is posted. And finally, the name of the actual ISO file. If you are not using authentication, you can skip the username or put in any value. Now you can verify the mapping was successful with the Show Mappings command. You'll see the mapping name you specified, in this case APIC, and should see an OK for the map status. The connect host command will allow you to use the serial over LAN feature to connect you to the virtual console port. At this point, you want to power cycle the server. And as it's booting, you want to enter the boot menu. You'll do that by pressing the F6 button on your keyboard. If your keyboard doesn't send the right function key, you can use the virtual keyboard option. I'm going to speed up some of these sections to make the video a little bit shorter. Alright, here's where you want to hit F6 to get into the boot menu. You'll notice it will say entering boot menu if it successfully received that keyboard click. The password here is whatever you've configured for the BIOS password. If you haven't configured anything, it's probably the word password. Password. And here you want to select the SIMC mapped virtual DVD. The server is now booting from the virtual DVD. This can take some time. I've once again sped up the video. Switching back over to the serial over LAN connection will give you more detail than you will see from the KVM monitor, or even the physical monitor if you have it plugged in. Looking at the serial over LAN, you'll see some output asking you to enter the ISO URL to speed up the install. This is what you need to do with such a large ISO file and is required for version 5.3 and above. What it does is boot up to a bare minimum via the SIMC virtual media mapping. Then from here on, it will boot over the faster web or NFS connection. Here you enter the full URL to the ISO that is hosted on your web or NFS server. You are next prompted to configure the network settings for this temporary connection. This is not using the SIMC management interface, but rather out-of-band or in-band APIC management interfaces. Since these haven't been configured yet, you'll need to set them up for this temporary connection. In this video, I'll use static, but DHCP should also work as well. So which interface are you going to choose? I'm going to use the 10 gigabit copper interfaces on the MLOM, which when finally installed will be the APIC out-of-band interfaces. The SFP connections on the PCIe Riser 1 would be the interfaces connected to the fabric leaf for in-band communications. These shorter interfaces at the top are the copper connections on the MLOM. And the top one, at least for me, is the very bottom left copper interface. So that's the one I'm going to use. Next, give it an IP address with a subnet mask and a default gateway. It will do a quick pin check and begin downloading from the web server. If the installation pauses there, it's probably due to either a unplugged cable or maybe you've chosen the wrong interface. This process will then proceed without prompting the user for any more information. You'll know when this is done when the server is powered off and stays off. I'll go ahead and speed up the video as this process takes quite a while. Alright, so it's done installing. We're just going to wait for the server to power off. Before powering it back on, we want to unmount the SIMC mounted vMedia ISO. We'll go back over to the SSH terminal and hit Ctrl X to exit out of the serial over LAN. We can use the unmap command when in the vMedia scope, followed by the name of the mapping, which was APIC in this case. Now you need to power on the server and can perform the initial configuration using either the serial over LAN connection or the KVM GUI. The server should boot automatically from the hard drive, and you won't need to worry about selecting a boot device. Once again, I'll go ahead and speed up this step. You're now at the initial configuration screen. Pressing any key to continue will allow you to perform the initial bootstrap. You'll notice this process may look a little bit different than version 6.0, which was shipped on the APIC. You'll notice this process took about 20 minutes. Hopefully you found this helpful.